Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and together with my co-host, Mark Rome at Just Statewide News Service, jbiztechphilly.com, and as you can see here, columnist for the Jewish Press.
And I'm having a lot of fun doing all of that, and the column I write about is how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. So, but with us today, we're going to talk a little bit about government, but from a different perspective. And we're going to talk about water specifically. And we have Bob Michaels here, Dr. Bob Michaels, who has his own company called TRAC. Now, RAM is your initials, Robert A. Michaels, but what is TRAC? And welcome to the Jewish View.
Well, thanks for hosting me, and it's a pleasure to continue this conversation. TRAC is Toxicology and Risk Assessment Consulting.
Okay.
And you're busy?
Sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is very specific kind of industry, you know. I mean, now that I'm sure Mark's going to bring this up about the Hoosick Falls, the polluted water, but thank God it's not always. Maybe, I don't know, tell me about it.
I have been very busy recently,
really?
Very busy.
Because of Hoosick Falls? Or?
Well, one reason is Hoosick Falls, and one reason is PCBs in the Hudson River, and I've got some cases involving mold in a residence and some other things involving some sewage in a residence, and who knows, I've got several cases.
How do you get rid of mold in a residence?
Well, fortunately, my job is not to get rid of it. My job is to assess, not to create it, but to assess the risks that are posed, and especially when somebody claims that something has happened to them, and they attribute it to the mold, and they want somebody to pay. My job is to figure out if that actually has some plausibility.
But inherently, don't you have to know how to get rid of mold just out of personal curiosity, or just through your research and just through toxicology? I mean, don't you just, it may not be a profession, part of what you do in terms of an analysis, but wouldn't you just have to know?
Yes, and actually, I had another mold case for the New York State Attorney General's office, and
in Albany here.
In Albany, yeah, in Capitol.
Had mold at their office.
Oh no, that was, I don't remember where the house was. It was a group home, and it somehow came under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General. I don't know the legal issues. I guess I have no idea, Mark, but I can tell you that I learned one way not to get rid of mold, and that could make things worse. Clorox, and the problem being that the Clorox has water in it, and when the chlorine disappears, the water is great for the mold. So if you haven't killed it all, it grows back using the water that's left behind.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And you may get rid of some mold with it, but mold is very powerful in the sense that it produces spores that are resistant, so there's always these leftovers. So that was a bad way of getting rid of it, and they tried a couple of other things, but I won't go into those details. A good reason I won't is because I don't remember them. But it is very interesting that mold comes in many different forms, and there are many different ways to deal with it, actually. The primary being moisture control.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you about Hoosick Falls, Petersburg, Nassau now. I mean, what is PFOA? And, you know, I mean, I used to work with Water Technology magazine. I never thought cryptosporidium and giardia would be my vocabulary. But, you know, I just want you to tell us what's going on in those communities that are, you know, in a layman's terminology, I guess.
Well, you started by asking what PFOA is, and it is shortened because it's perfluorooctanoic acid, which is a bit of a tongue twister. And it is...
Can you say it a little slower? No, I'm serious.
Perfluorooctanoic acid.
Okay.
Octane being what you are familiar with for gasoline, 8 carbons, and perfluoro means that each one's got a lot of fluorine on it. Mm-hmm. And it's octanoic acid because it has an acid group as well, an organic acid group, which is a carbon and a double bonded oxygen and an OH. So it's a...
So you got your science lab sent over here, Mark.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Thank you.
But from an industrial standpoint, what it does is it is used in the production of various products, such as, most notably, everyone's heard of Teflon.
Yeah.
Hopefully your Teflon doesn't include any PFOA, but the process by which Teflon is produced involves PFOA, and so companies have big amounts of PFOA delivered for their processes. In the case of Hoosick Falls, it was the St. Gobain Performance Plastics Company. Mm-hmm. And performance plastics means that the plastics can do things that other plastics can't do, such as in the case of Teflon, shed everything. In the case of a cable to conduct electricity, it's a great insulator and it's resistant to heat. And that is also one of the qualities of sheeting that is made for various purposes.
So it's a good chemical if you use it right.
Well, if you use it right, I suppose it is, because you're supposed to consume it in the industrial process, and what you come up with, it doesn't have it in it. The problem is if your hygiene as a corporation is not perfect, it's easy to release that stuff into the groundwater or into the air. In Hoosick Falls, it's very possible that both are involved.
So let me ask you about the Teflon part. They say don't use metal on a Teflon pan because you might scratch the Teflon. You know, they say use something that's non-scratch, something that's rubber or plastic or whatever, soft plastic. So if you do use something that's metal on Teflon, you do scrape it off, and it gets in your food. Is that bad?
I don't think it's as bad as if you overheat it. Now, in the old Teflon pots, that don't scratch it was a big problem because the bonding of the Teflon to the pot was not so great. Now they've got other pots that are better at grabbing onto the Teflon. But if you did have some of it in your body, it's a fairly inert substance, and I don't really know, I haven't investigated for our conversation what might happen, but I do know that if you put it on a stove and you overheat it, the Teflon does break down and it releases toxic gases such as phosphine and arsine gases, and that is probably not a good idea.
When you say this is now, it's a new problem, it's a current event, like Mark's saying, Hoosick, Florida, Petersburg. This has been going on for a long time. Why all of a sudden, saying, oh, there's a problem here? I mean, they've been using this, like you say, a chemical, you tell me how many years, but Teflon's been around for tens of years.
Well, 70s, I think. Right?
All right, so that's 30, 40 years. I mean, that's a long time. All of a sudden, oh, this chemical they're using is no good for,
that's
getting
not
into
to
the
say
water.
that's not to say that over the past 40 years, if it's leached into the water, that high cancer rates are just being seen now.
Well,
maybe because of that. That's,
I won't correct your history because I don't know it precisely when Teflon and when PFOA first were used. But I will say that the concentrations in the water are in the part per trillion range. And in the early days, it was a challenge even to measure that concentration. And it's one of the small number of compounds that are really toxic at concentrations that low. And so the knowledge about PFOA started to emerge when it became apparent that you and me and pretty much everyone has residues of PFOA in their body.
You can't release it or something?
Well, it's inert.
Well, it's long-lasting in the body. It takes probably decades to get rid of it. And I don't know how many decades I've got left. I don't expect to be getting rid of it because my exposure is continuous as well. We are all exposed to PFOA and to its related...
Through water, you mean?
Through water or through air, yeah, that's right, or through foods or who knows what, if you...
Is it a Teflon pan or something? Maybe?
Well, it depends on what things have been manufactured and whether they've been manufactured appropriately.
So are you working specifically on with those villages and towns in Rensselaer County?
Hoosick Falls in particular.
They brought you in?
Well, the group that I'm working for is the citizens group called Healthy Hoosick Water. And so I was invited in December to make a presentation at a public meeting, which I did. And it was a very interesting public meeting because this problem had become quite popularized and publicized. And I think about 17 people came from the US EPA, including Judith Enck, the regional administrator. And some people, senior people, came from the Department of Health, I think about 2 or 3, and likewise from the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is in New York State. And when I made my presentation, I said to the public and to the administrator and to everyone present, and of course it was in the news as well, that the advisory value that EPA had put forth for drinking water, which at that time was 400 parts per trillion, was irrelevant to the town of Hoosick Falls, the village of Hoosick Falls.
Why?
It was irrelevant largely because it was a short-term advisory, which meant that you could be exposed to that amount for about 2 weeks or so. That was the short-term duration that it was applicable to. But if you grew up there, or you were working there, or you moved and retired there, you're there for decades, not 2 weeks. You could take a 2-week vacation and that might be fine. But it was also irrelevant for another reason, which is that PFOA lasts a long time in your body. So there's no real such thing as 2 weeks of exposure. When you consume PFOA, that is with you for a long time. And so whatever it does, it can continue to do for a long time as well.
So where's the harmful level? Is there, I mean, zero tolerance on this, where even a little bit part per trillion would still be dangerous, or?
Well, I won't commit myself to an actual number, but I will repeat what I said at the public meeting, which was that I would guess that you'd have to go down someplace between 1 and 10 parts per trillion in order to get to a safe level. Now, the EPA just a couple of days ago came out with a new standard, which is actually what you call an advisory. A standard is enforceable, an advisory is not. So this is 70 parts per trillion in drinking water as the sum of PFOA and a related chemical called PFOS, which is perfluorooctanoic octane sulfonate. So it is...
Not an acid.
No, it's a sulfur compound. And there are actually a group of about a half dozen related compounds, which are called perfluoroalkyl compounds, that are standard for testing in drinking water systems. But for these two, the sum of 70, and in my opinion, it is a sum that even as a sum is too high. If you figure that they're evenly distributed, you might say you're talking 35 parts per trillion. I think it's too high.
But also, it's only for that village of Hoosick Falls. Petersburg has a different number, Oklahoma has a different number of parts per trillion. This is not uniform across the country.
This is uniform across the country. This is a US EPA...
The 70 parts per trillion is across the country?
Right.
Well, then you should be listening to these so-called talk shows, because maybe you could call in or tell them and correct them, because they're giving what we call bubble mines, as a technical term, about these numbers. And you know that even though it's the US EPA, which is the national agency, they said on the talk show that they only had the regulations just for the village of Hoosick Falls.
Well, that is not true, and it was kind of a little true for the standard or advisory that the EPA Region 2 office came out with only weeks after I told them how irrelevant the 400 was. They came out with 100 parts per trillion in drinking water just for PFOA. Right. But in the case of PFOA in drinking water, that is what you call a chronic number, meaning it's not for 2 weeks. you can be exposed to that for a year. And of course, in my opinion, that was way too high. But relative to your question, that was for Region 2,
Okay.
which includes Hoosick Falls in New York State
Okay.
and a few other states.
But not Oklahoma. I mean,
Not
apparently
Oklahoma
There's a
and-
PFOA issue in the Midwest and Oklahoma and a few other.
Well, there's PFOA issue everywhere, but the fact is that the landmark cases involved West Virginia and Ohio. And in particular in Ohio, a water treatment system, a water system called Little Hocking, in which PFOA was detected. And now you have to put treatment facilities on to reduce those numbers down to non-detect.
There is ways to cure it, though? I mean, you're saying from the water systems, filters or whatever?
What
to
you
clean this up?
use for a municipal water treatment system, and what Hoosick Falls is using, is a granular activated carbon filter that is very good at adsorbing PFOA and other perfluoroalkyl compounds. It doesn't solve all the problems for two reasons. Number one is you need a series of filter beds, and you need continuous testing so you know when the filter bed has been consumed and it has to be replaced. That's one reason.
Like
so
a fish tank.
Like a fish
Carbon
tank.
in a fish tank. You
Yeah.
got to know when to replace the carbon.
Yeah.
Right, same type of thing.
And it's a good analogy because you really don't want to wait for the fish to get sick or die.
That's right.
The other problem is that a lot of people have their own private wells.
Right.
And then you've got point of entry treatment options, which usually involve a kind of pre-filter with some kind of cloth or woven filter, followed by a carbon filter, followed by a reverse osmosis filter. And so those systems are fairly effective, I think, very effective, actually.
You're bringing me back to the days when I worked for Water Technology magazine, and I had a write about reverse osmosis and adsorption and, you know, all the other words that you're using now, which other people might not. They got to go look up, either they got their tablet or whatever, and they're looking up these words now. But, you know, we can't go into explaining what all this means right now.
I don't want to get technical, but if you want to know if it can be treated, the answer is yes. From a point of view of a water user, it can be treated. But the responsibility is to clean up the environment. We have the Jewish view,
Right.
It is tikkun olam. You are supposed to be repairing the earth, and it's not only tikkun olam that requires it, it's the United States Superfund Act that also requires it. And Hoosick Falls has been declared a...
So how do you so then take it further. So how do you clean up what, a whole lake or a whole pond or a whole reservoir? Those are big things now.
Yes, and those are technical questions. For a groundwater area, a typical way of working, which, for example, was done in Love Canal, is that you pump groundwater and create what is called a cone of depression, where the water pressure goes down, the water table goes down. And now the groundwater around it flows to the center where you're pumping. And that pumping produces water that is filtered, and the filter, the carbon filter, can be put to a landfill, or it can be regenerated by various techniques.
Before we run out of time, I just wanted to ask you about you mentioned about GE and the dredging.
Right.
Which you're involved with also.
Right, yes.
Well, you're getting to know Judith Inc. very well, aren't you?
Well,
Anyway, I'm just saying that with the thing that bothered me the most about the GE dredging is that they were in the 50s, when they asked for permission from the EPA to dump these PCBs, they were given permission from the federal government. And then all of a sudden, the federal government changed their mind and said, well, sorry, we gave you permission then, but now you got to be responsible for cleaning it up, even though we told you that you could put it there.
I will demur and say, well, I will disagree, but I will preface my disagreement by saying that I'm not a lawyer, and you're raising an issue that I'm not 100% comfortable dealing with.
I don't think I used any legal terminology in that.
No, you
I think
didn't,
I
but you
stated
raised a legal issue, which is you also got permission, in this case from the state government, to drive a car. But if you do damage to somebody, you're responsible, and that's why you carry insurance. And so the fact of whether GE dumped legally or illegally, which I will not opine on, is only part of the issue. The other part being that when you have natural resource damage, that produces and generates a natural resource damage claim, which is in process right now in New York State to assess damages to GE for damaging the environment of the Hudson River. Now, whether there are other kinds of damages, such as punitive damages, associated with illegal activities, I can't opine on that. I'm not a legal person.
I wasn't saying whether it was legal or not legal. All I said was that they were given permission by the federal government and they were allowed to put the PCBs there. So I'm thinking if the federal government allowed them to put the PCB there, the federal government should be responsible for cleaning it up. That's my own personal opinion. It's not illegal one way or the other, but I'm just saying that I'm just disappointed that, you know, here you can have an opinion and and they have the documentation from the federal, GE has the documentation from the federal government that says, here's the go-ahead, here's the green light, we could put it down there.
I won't respond to that in the sense of knowing what documents GE might have. I certainly know that things were legal until laws were passed against them. Whether standards of practice were violated for the time is beyond what I think we can cover today.
Okay.
I misinterpreted your question when you said that the federal government gave them permission. I thought you were saying it was legal. And I'm not sure the federal government can give permission without giving legality to an action.
Okay, so let me ask you about Israel. Are you involved with water in Israel? About the desalination and...
No, I'm not.
You didn't follow what Israel's doing?
I follow it in the news, yes.
You follow in the news, not in the trades.
I don't have a consulting engagement there or something like that.
Let me ask you, there's something you brought up earlier about this Holocaust essay contest.
Right.
So tell me about what you're doing.
Were you the initiator of this idea, or you take care of it?
I was not the initiator of it. I think it must be at least 20 and maybe closer to 30 years old. And the people who were involved primarily were Phil Rubens from B'nai B'rith in Schenectady, and probably also Malcolm Abrams. Those are two names that I believe were both involved in the inception of that contest. And I used to help out, because Phil made great hot tea and he would serve wonderful cookies. And we had a very nice evening together, a group of us stuffing envelopes and mailing invitations and the whole works. It was a social as well as a socially important thing to do.
So who were the winners this year, and how many winners, and what was the essays, and just a broad brush, nothing really specific. But
well, I can't tell you who the winners are because I don't remember all the names and so
how
on.
Old are they? Are they youngsters? Are they under 10? Are they teenagers?
They are a group of high school and middle school students in a 12-county area who compete, and each one has a sponsoring teacher, and usually the sponsoring teacher submits a pile of essays, and those go to me. I code them, so there's a cover page and an essay. I separate them as long as they both have the code. I know how to reconstitute who won. The judges don't, so they're judging blind. They don't know the student, they don't know the school, they don't know the sponsoring teacher.
I see.
So it's a fair judging process.
Are the judges? How many judges?
We have this year, I believe, 7 judges.
Okay, anyone of prominence that, like Carl Rosner, or any Holocaust survivors, or anyone that you might know?
I don't think any of them are survivors, although I would have to search my
Are
memory.
they from the area that you're receiving? Are they 7 judges from 7 counties?
Oh, no, they're just people who,
Okay.
have come to my
You know, it's
attention.
important, though, you say
Okay.
12 counties, this is not specifically for Jewish children, it's for every, you have many non-Jewish children that write essays about the Holocaust. Because I just think
Absolutely.
that's an important point, because, first of all, it's important to have Jewish children be educated about the Holocaust. I don't know what percentage, you know, we really know about what the Nazis did, but, you know, it's important for the non-Jewish children to understand. I think there's an incredible ignorance. I forgot the number, so I don't want to say, maybe you know, just the people, you say Holocaust, what is that, you know, and, you know, so I think that's dangerous, because, not just because we're Jewish people and we care about it, but it's just like what happened to the, in Germany, if you don't care about something, hey, this is where, you know, hatred could lead. Say, okay, I don't like these kind of people. You know, well, you better be careful, because that's how, you know, the Holocaust really started. They didn't start building gas chambers until for 6-7 years. It's the hate and hate and hate, and you get so riled up. The next step doesn't have to be the next step, but, you know, this where hatred can lead. So I just think it's an important point that you're inviting non-Jewish children to learn about what really happened.
So how many essays were submitted?
Well, I keep that a little close to my chest. We had the highest number of essays submitted in the last 3 years. This year, 2015 and 2014, had the highest number of essays ever submitted in the entire...
Are we talking 50? Are we talking 5? I mean...
A lot more than those numbers, but I won't disclose those numbers. But I will say that we are blind, as it turns out, for religion.
Right.
We don't know the percent of students who are Jewish. We have no way of knowing that or interest in knowing that.
What do the students receive when they win the prizes?
We give out cash prizes amounting to almost $1,000 to the students. We give some money to the participating sponsoring teachers. We give certificates that are suitable for framing and very useful, I think, for the students to get jobs or get into college. And we give certificates of achievement produced by representatives in their district, such as Paul Tonko's office, and you know.
And the money that you give is raised by B'nai B'rith, or it's given by B'nai B'rith, or is it?
The major support has come from Bino Sternlicht's Holocaust Memorial Fund, which is administered by the Jewish Federation of Northeastern New York. And so we get money from them. We get money from the Albany Gideon Lodge of B'nai B'rith. We get money from the Gates of Heaven Brotherhood.
Right.
And we get private donations from individuals as well.
And what's your involvement with Gates of Heaven Brotherhood? Because you have an involvement with them.
Well, I also happen to be on their board, and I also happen to be director of their speaker program. We have something called Breakfast and the Speaker,
Right.
and both are good. The breakfast is pretty good too.
Which is very popular. I've been to a few of them, yeah.
And Jim Clevenson, as you mentioned, was at one, and I know you were there. It was nice to see you
I was
there.
there when Dr. Lozman
And
gave his,
Michael Lozman, yes.
gave his talk on cemeteries. you know,
Right.
Restoring Eastern European cemeteries.
Right. We have very interesting programs, and it's a pleasure for me to interact with the people who I invite as speakers.
Well, you had Rex Smith as a speaker once.
Not on my watch. If
No,
we
not
did,
on your watch. It was
if we
about 3 to
did,
4 years ago.
yeah, this is
And-
my third year
Oh, it
now.
must have been 4 or 5 years ago then.
Yeah.
And then I was there for, who else? Anyway, there was some other people. You have fascinating guests, you really do. And
Yeah.
one thing that I asked Rex Smith, who's the chief editor of the Times Union, is why isn't there more Jewish coverage of Jewish ethnic or religious issues in the paper? He goes, because if we started with one religion or ethnicity, we'd have to cover them all, and we don't have the staff to do that, plus we don't have the knowledge in our staff to be able to do that, so it would be a heavy lift. So then I said, aha, and that's when I started my, the basis of my website, jbiztechvalley.com, and news Jews can use, because if he's not going to do it with the Times Union, I had a clear path to filling that gap.
I think we're out of time, but it was really enlightening, both from the, I hope our viewers know about it, because, I mean, this is a pressing issue. You have to have the good air and the good water. I mean,
That's
if without that, you have nothing.
Water is the source of life.
There you go.
That's-
Imam el Torah. The only water is really Torah, but that gives the Jewish person the nourishment, but you need physical nourishment also. But plus, you're doing great work with the Holocaust studies of just having the knowledge of the Holocaust to Jews and non-Jews. I think it's very, very important. And continue your good work with good health.
Well,
Continued
thank you
success.
very much.
you.
Thank you for inviting me, and wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it, and again,
Thank you.
thanks.